Welcome, everybody, to the Oxygen Addict podcast. We're brought to you every week by our sponsors, precisionfuelandhydration.com. You can personalize your fueling and hydration strategy so you can perform at your best. You can get 15% off your first order of electrolytes and carbohydrate fuel with the code OA23 at precisionfuelandhydration.com. So welcome to the show, everybody. I'm your host, Coach Rob Wilby, and I'm joined by co-host Coach Chris Palfreman. Chris, how are you doing today?
Hello, everyone. Hello, Rob. Yeah, very well. Thank you.
Every week, we try and bring you an episode of this podcast to help motivate and inspire you. Two things you can do for us before we get started. If you like this episode, please like and subscribe on either YouTube or the podcast player that you're currently listening or watching on. And remember, if you're looking for help and advice with your endurance training, we'd be happy to help you. You can get in touch via help@oxygenaddict.com, or there's a link in the show notes that'll click through to our website. We coach primarily triathletes at middle and long distance, but we also coach endurance athletes in running, swimming, biking, and all the combinations of those as well. So if you are considering getting in touch, please do so. We love hearing from you. Even if it's ended up not giving you a training plan or coaching, it's always great to hear from the community, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, totally. Very happy to help in any way.
And especially right now, as we're recording, we're kicking on towards, well, we're right in the very beginning of race season in the UK at the moment, aren't we? And we're getting loads of emails, DMs on Instagram, messages on Facebook about people who've got 4 weeks, 6 weeks to go to their race. And the listeners to the podcast or watchers of the YouTube channel and saying, you know, I've learned loads from listening to you, but please help. Oh my God, my race is coming up on. What am I going to do? I've just realized I've bitten off more than I can possibly chew. So if you're one of those people, please do get in touch. A really common thing people say is, I never thought that coaching or training plan was for somebody like me, but it turns out all the people in the group are just like I am. So if you're one of those people suffering right now from a little bit of imposter syndrome, know that you're not alone and that all the people on the inside are just like you, except you're still on the outside at the moment. So please feel free to get in contact and we'll do our best to help you out as best we can. Chris, today we're going to try and help people out who have got races coming up in the near future. And this is probably an episode for people to bookmark, to play, I think, in the week before their race, because we had a very interesting discussion with the team a few weeks ago, didn't we, around things that can go wrong on race day, things that bother people in the mind, things that get stuck in athletes' heads and they worry about, and essentially, what do I do if this or that thing happens? We encouraged our athletes in the group to make a list of all the things that they were worried about. And what started as a 5-minute conversation in one of our team calls ended up being a 27-person post in the group, I think, Chris, in the end.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know about you, Rob, but there's definitely been a shift in the style of conversation, the style of email that I'm getting at the moment from whether it's one-to-one athletes, high-performance athletes, or team members. And there seems to be a real shift and a bit of anxiety around race day, which is totally normal. It shows that we care and, you know, we're preparing ourselves for the best possible performance that we can do on the day. And the closer you get to that day, the more kind of irrational we can get and the more, oh God, I haven't thought about that. Am I going to be okay? And I think that post on our kind of internal system just shows that a huge amount of athletes have been through experiences that are not optimal on race day. Some have found solutions and others didn't on race day, but we want to make sure that anyone listening to this is at least aware of what could happen, and that plan A is brilliant until you're Mike Tyson and you get punched in the face, and, you know, we need plan B. So I think, yeah, hopefully by the end of this episode, at least we would have highlighted some scenarios that could happen on race day. Doesn't mean that it will happen, and we hope it won't, but at some point in your triathlon journey and racing experience, I do think that you'll be a better and more comfortable athlete on the start line if at least you've approached these scenarios.
100% so. And at the end of the day, I think a lot of the worries are only there because we don't know how we're going to deal with them. Once we've got a plan for how to deal with them, then it just becomes, well, I've got a plan and I'll deal with that later on. So we have got an enormous list that we want to jump into to go through things. And hopefully at the end of this episode, you, the listener, will be sitting there thinking, right, if any of these things go wrong, I've got a plan B for what to do with all of these things. But before we kick on, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Precision Fuel and Hydration. You can go to their website and you can use the free fuel and hydration planning tool, and you'll receive a personalized strategy for your next race. The planner will help you understand your own carbohydrate needs, your electrolyte needs, and your own fluid needs, so you can stay fueled, hydrated, and with the right level of electrolytes for your races and for your training. You can even book a free one-to-one video consultation with PFNH's athlete support team, and they'll be really happy to help you nail your race nutrition plan. One of the things we'll be talking about later on, Chris, is one of the 4 horsemen of racing. It's cramping, isn't it? We'll come back to talking about precision fuel and hydration and why they're so good and why they're the market leaders. But cramp is one of the things that we can take care of. And often we can take care of it by making sure our electrolyte and fluid balance is right in the 10 days leading up to the race, as well as on race day itself. And often that starts with the habits of having it right in training. So as much as we're going to talk today about, here are things you can do on race day, a lot of these things are going to be strategies that an athlete can use on a day-by-day basis and can work into their training so it becomes second nature. And I think fueling electrolytes and getting the water levels right on a day-by-day basis is one of the most important things. But we'll come back to that later on. So let's kick this off. We'll go in swim, bike, run order, I think, Chris. That's the first place to start with this. The swim was a place where athletes had a lot of anxiety, wasn't it? And understandably so, whether it's things going wrong with the kit, with the body, with the course, with the weather, all manner of things people worry about. But I think it's because we're immersed in water, it adds an extra element of things to worry about right from the start, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the swim training we do is in a really controlled environment, whether that's in the pool or even in the open water. We tend to be with a swim buddy or 2. We're not thrown into the water with 800 people and above, and it does create a lot of chaos. But I think that chaos can be really calm if you've been through the process in your mind, you know what to expect, and you've kind of got a strategy for all the different scenarios that could happen, whether it's weather, whether it's kit malfunctions, whether it's pacing, or even where to put yourself in the start pen. All these things, it means that you're not flapping about as you hear the race announcer saying 30 seconds till race start. You already know what's about to happen. You're comfortable with your decision making, and then you're just going through a process. But we've all seen it on the start line where people are literally sprinting around looking for spare goggles. They can't zip themselves up. They're looking for water to put down their wetsuit. They're looking for which pen should I be in. All these things just adds a massive amount of stress. And when you're looking at middle and long distance triathlon, that is exactly the kind of scenario you want to avoid. Your heart rate's going to be through the roof. And just the sense of panic just doesn't set you up for the best possible day. It should be a kind of a relaxed day. When you're talking about 10 hours and above, it's a long day. So why start it with a huge amount of stress?
So let's think about heading down to the ideal swim race start. There are things that can go wrong. And I mean, God forbid your goggles won't snap on race day morning. But if they do, a really good tip that I was given early doors is get an old pair of goggles and take them down with you, just wrapped around your wrist. Someone's goggles are going to break. And if they're not yours, you can actually give those away to somebody else and save their race. But that old pair of goggles around your wrist can really be an extra, just like a little thing to stop you worrying. For most people, the thing we spent a lot of time working on with athletes in camp when we did the open water swim sessions out in Mallorca, I was amazed by how many of our athletes had never been shown how to put on a wetsuit properly and how to make the wetsuit fit properly, and who thought that a wetsuit going on dry was the way it's supposed to feel. And when we showed athletes how to do that, how to make it wet and how to get it to fit properly, people were staggered, and at least half the athletes in the session hadn't been shown that. So we'll go through that now. The key thing with your wetsuit is it's not meant to fit and feel comfy when it's dry. If it does, there's probably something wrong. So you need to get some water down the inside of the suit. The ideal scenario is going to be allowed into the water before the race start, to pull the front of the suit forward at the neck, to scoop a whole load of water in and let it run down your wetsuit, get it down the arms, get it down the legs, and then kind of squeegee it down your body so all that water runs out. Your suit then fits really well and you won't get cold. Lots of races don't let you do that these days. They don't let you get into the water for a swim warm-up. So one advice we gave people is to carry a 2-litre bottle of tap water down to the race start, and then you can just pour it down your neck at the start, get some down the arms, let it run down. that will honestly make I'm going to say 50 to 80% comfort difference, both in terms of how the suit feels when it's on, but also in terms of how comfortable and confident you feel when you start swimming, because your suit then feels like a second skin when you get in the water, doesn't it? Rather than, there's nothing worse than that feeling of being in colder water and it starts to seep in down the neck or in through a seam somewhere as you're swimming. You want to feel comfortable from the moment your race swim starts as much as possible.
Yeah, spot on, Rob. And the only thing I'd add to that is take your time to put your wetsuit on. You don't want to hear the race announcer talking about what's about to happen and you're still putting on a wetsuit. Put it on in plenty of time. One, especially in the UK, the races are usually early morning and cold, so put the wetsuit on to stay warm. But secondly, I think it takes 10 to 15 minutes to really put on a wetsuit and kind of micro adjust it from the bottom of the ankles all the way up by pulling it a tiny bit, because you really want to avoid that sensation of the wetsuit pulling down on your shoulders. And that's the restriction that a lot of people talk about. So if you're able to kind of grab it, make sure you don't rip it with your nails, but grab it slowly but surely and really bring it up so that it goes right into the armpits. And that's just going to, really help the mobility through the shoulders. And you should be standing there feeling pretty comfortable.
Yeah. It's getting it up into the crotch. That's something that happens. It's not unusual to look at guys and ladies and men with the wetsuit on, and there's kind of like a 2-inch gap between where the wetsuit is and where the crotch is. So it's kind of getting both hands and rolling it up your thighs almost. Start at the calves and then up your thighs and really get the suit into the crotch, and then you can get the suit up into your armpits. That makes such a massive difference for people when they feel comfortable. And I honestly think a lot of the sensations of, people describe problems later on, like the hyperventilation and the panic attacks and the feelings of not being able to breathe. A lot of that is down to the suit not being on properly, not fitting properly, or being dry when the athlete gets into the water. And we can deal with problems that might happen later by preparation we can do earlier. That's a real key part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And get some help. Get someone, to stand behind you.
Everyone feels the same, right? Yeah. In transition.
Yeah. Get some help. Someone else can really help bring the suit up behind you as well, up your back. And totally.
Yeah, it's a good one. So we've talked a bit there about goggles being a problem. I've got a little list here on the screen. I'm going to make sure we don't miss anything off. Zip malfunctions are quite a common one. And the challenge here, I think, is if your zip goes on your wetsuit, I mean, what really can you do? I think it's one of those situations where you're extremely unlucky and you have to hope. You've got to look at keeping your kit in really good condition. And if you're in any doubt whether you need a new suit, you've invested thousands of pounds and who knows how many hours into the race it might be, getting yourself a new suit 4 weeks before race day is much better than worrying 4 days before race day and thinking I haven't got time to sort it now.
Yeah, similar to the bike, isn't it, with mechanicals? If you've got a fully functioning, very healthy bike, the likelihood of everything going right is very high. Same with a wetsuit. If it's in good condition, you look after it, then, if the zip is a freak zip that breaks, you're just going to have to deal with it. Whether you keep the wetsuit on and swim like that and just take the time penalty, that's okay. Or if you're lucky enough to be in amazing crystal, nice warm waters, then there is the option of just ditching the suit as long as it's safe and there are other people doing the same thing, then you're not too much of a penalty there. But what you want to do is not utterly freak out, break down into tears, because that's not going to help. Just option A is carry on as is and keep a suit that's broken, deal with it. Or secondly, rip the suit off and do a skin swim. And both of those good options. Both of those aren't the end of your day, especially in middle distance and long distance. That's okay. That's just the first portion of 3. Keep fighting, keep finding a solution, have a smile on your face, thinking that this is not what I prepared for, but it's okay. I'm still on the start line. Go for it.
Yeah, 100%. And let's talk a little bit about for anyone who's racing in the middle of Europe this summer, there is a realistic possibility, I'd say 1 year out of 3, either Germany, Austria, not Roth, have been non-wetsuit swims at the last minute. And they've had real heat waves. And all of a sudden, Germany's notorious for it, where the water is really quite shallow there. And it can be, if it's a really hot heat wave summer, it can end up being a non-wetsuit swim that you only find out about either the day before or sometimes on the morning of the race. So you need to be prepared for that thought of, it will certainly be a wetsuit swim. isn't always going to be the case. I think you can be pretty sure in the UK, it's going to be a wetsuit swim. But if you're going to race abroad in Europe or even further afield in America and Australia, you need to be confident that you can cover the distance in your skins. That's a big part of it. And the preparation there, again, is the key thing, rather than the having to worry about it on race day morning. It's too late at that point.
I actually had the complete opposite at Ironman Mallorca years ago, and we had a whole briefing the night before of it's definitely not going to be a wetsuit swim, and everyone was flapping, thinking, oh, we thought it was going to be. And then on the morning of, we're all in transition, and the race organizers say overnight we've had some wind and the temperatures change, you're allowed to use a wetsuit. And those that were either nervous swimmers were thinking, oh my God, my wetsuit's in my hotel. And those that are looking to be competitive are thinking, oh my God, I need to be in that front pack. And I actually took the decision to run back to my hotel. Luckily, it wasn't too far, probably 1 kilometer away. And I just did it as a warm-up run, but I was so desperate to have that wetsuit. And I was kicking myself that I've got my wetsuit with me. Why isn't it in my rucksack at all times? I'm going into the open water. You don't know. It's a bit of a lottery. So if you've got your wetsuit with you in the hotel, take it to the start line, take it to race day. You just never know. And, you know, try and control the controllables. The controllable is you've got a wetsuit, take it with you.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree more. Let's talk about a couple of things that can happen during the swim then. We've had athletes worrying about cramp, and we've had athletes worrying about what happens if I'm blinded by the sun. The sun's rising and it's in the direction that I'm breathing. What do I do then? I think that the sunrise thing is an easy one to prepare for in training. And that's because all of you out there are practicing your bilateral swimming, right? So you can breathe on the other side, right?
Is that rhetorical?
I think there are some people out there thinking, oh, maybe I should be. But this is a really great example. A swimmer who's comfortable breathing on both sides doesn't have the problem of being blinded by the sun rising on the one side. I think everyone has got a more comfortable side to breathe. But if you're still 6, 8, 10 weeks away from race day and you can only breathe on one side, well, you've got a really good chance to practice doing it, because at the very least, you can then take every other breath away from the sun and not be blinded. At the very least, you can think about taking 2 pairs of goggles, one with a clear lens and one with a dark lens. And if it is going to be really sunny, that's something, again, that if you swim in open water in the UK, and most of the time it isn't sunny in the UK, it's cloudy or it's often dark. You go abroad to race and it's very bright, and it turns out that those goggles that you've got that are clear lenses are not ideal for what you need them for. So again, 2 pairs of goggles there for the right sort of conditions on the day could be really helpful.
Totally. And the majority of people are lucky enough to be at the event venue 1 or 2 days before the event. So that's the perfect opportunity. At the same time that you're going to race on race day, get in the water. Then you don't have to do a proper swim, but get in the water, get in the wetsuit, use the goggles that you're planning on using on race day, and sight, you use your sight of vision towards the area that you're going to be swimming in. And if there's a likelihood of the sun rising right into the eyes, then obviously goggles is plan A, but plan B is having landmarks that aren't so kind of impeded by the sunrise. So even if it's not in the direction that you're swimming, you've kind of got other reference points to know whether you're swimming in the right direction. And don't always rely on the person to your left and right. The likelihood is they're relying on you. And if you're going wrong, they're going wrong. And then you're adding a lot of meters to your race. So you kind of have to be self-sufficient in your sighting and be really confident with the environment that you're in. So take your time, go half an hour, at 7 a.m. or whatever time race start is, and get used to it. Be prepared for that, that blinding light.
The year that I did Ironman France, this is a unique race in that you swim off the shore and there's literally nothing on the horizon for you to look at as you're swimming out for a kilometer. Me and the group of about 200 people I was swimming with swam to the wrong buoy. And we got to the buoy, we looked up, and it was just such mayhem. At the time, it was an all-in-one 2,500 people on the beach. You know what the beach is like down at Playa de l'Anglaise. It was absolutely terrifying, the race start there. But we swam to a buoy on the left that was for part of the swim later on. And when we looked up, we'd swum probably 300 meters off course. And we all kind of bobbed around for 10 seconds and someone started laughing. And then we all started laughing at the absurdity of it, that we'd all, there were 2,000 people over there to our right, 200 or so over here. Like, oh, we just followed the feet in front. And it's unique there. There's nothing on the horizon. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the only races where there is nothing you can see on. But in general, you're dead right. The buoy is small. Somehow they always manage to make the buoy the same color as most of the swim hats as well, right? So it's really hard to see. If you can sight on a tree or a church steeple or a house, or like in Ironman France's case, when you turn around and come back in, you can sight on the casino at a certain point. It's a really good landmark to look at, but it's so much easier than trying to sight on a buoy.
Yeah, and be confident. You know, if you had taken that decision and had a sense that you were drifting with the wrong pack at that point, it would have taken a big kind of bold decision to say, I'm actually going to peel away from these 200 people, because, you know, we're pack animals when it comes to racing, and we never want to be on our own. But actually, if you're confident you've done the good preparation and you're kind of a logical thinker on race day, you would have saved yourself a lot of time, and it would have felt great to peel away from that 200 and back yourself with the preparation that you've done. So yeah, be bold with your decision making.
Yeah, I think it goes to a broader point as well, that I mean, I really don't think that day I could have been more prepared. I knew where the course went, I knew where it roughly was, and it's just one of those things where when you're in the water, especially in the old mass starts where you're just surrounded by arms, legs, whitewater washing machine for 800 meters that doesn't let up. So people who are listening who don't have to go through the mass start, you don't know how lucky you are. Okay, let's move on to things on the bike then. Challenges people can have on the bike that they can prepare for, some of them that they can't prepare for. So let's go some of the stuff that you will almost certainly face at some point. The first point we've got here is, what if the roads are not closed? And what if there's car traffic on the road that's getting in the way of the bike ride? What if that causes packs of riders to form on the road, which it will? Now, this won't be an issue in your bigger marquee named Ironman challenge events around the world where the roads are completely closed. In all but those races, though, certainly in the UK, roads are open to traffic. And guess what? And the headline figure is that the cars on the road don't know that they're riding their car through the middle of a bike race. They think they're just going to do the shopping. And who are all these cyclists around? And yet in our head, we tend to think, why is this person in a car in the middle of my bike race? So that's the first part about it, isn't it? It's to keep in your head the idea that this is no different than you and a bunch of mates going out for a ride. You have to treat the traffic and the people in 2-ton lumps of metal with the respect that they deserve there.
Yeah, and they don't care. That's the, you know, you care about every second or every minute of your race, and you're trying to get the absolute best performance, but the people in the car don't care about your performance. So if you're, you know, right on the tail of their car because they're going really slowly, you're just going to have to do the safest thing and pull back 10 meters or whatever's safe in that scenario. But don't have the racer's mindset when the race course isn't a race course in that moment. It's live traffic. And yeah, one thing is, if that gives you anxiety just listening to what we're talking about of having live traffic on the roads that you're racing, if possible and when possible, plan your season to do as many closed road races as possible. And another one is do a recce of the race course that you're doing. If you are doing an open road, that really does help to understand the junctions, the roundabouts, where to keep your eyes up. And yeah, more often than not, go towards a race that excites you and that makes you feel safe. And if that means closed roads and paying a little bit more, then to be honest, it could well be worth it.
I think it's a really important point, isn't it? That, you know, the big marquee organizers get slagged off a lot for the price of their events. But the one thing that always you get with those is a closed road event. And yes, it is more money to enter, but how much safer do you feel or not doing a closed road event? Might you feel much safer having paid an extra £100 for a 70.3 and knowing it's on closed roads? That's something that when we talk to beginners and people new to the sport, a lot of them assume that every race is going to be closed roads. I know I did when I started, and it blew my mind that event. Yeah, I remember thinking, but I've paid all this money to enter this event. What do you mean there's traffic on the roads? What am I paying for almost? So it is worth thinking about that in the run up to which events you're going to enter. But I think an acceptance of, well, this is probably how it's going to be. You're probably going to end up at some point. There'll be a car or 2 cars or 5 cars stuck behind a rider who's a bit slower than you, and there's going to be 1 or 2 or 5 or 8 riders stuck behind that car, and everyone's wanted to try and get past, but you can't overtake the cars because it's not safe. It's just having a plan for what you're going to do in that situation and deciding that. I think you get an insight into your own personality a little bit, don't you? Are you going to be really calm and deal with the fact that you might be in this little traffic jam for a few minutes? Are you going to freak out and start shouting and swearing? What kind of person are you going to be in the race? And if you decide that beforehand, it's a lot easier to stick to it during the race.
Yeah, and I'm going to point people towards being the nicest possible human to either the person in the car or the other racers next to you. You know, we've seen some horrible situations that end up in crashes or confrontations, and we want to avoid that. That's not what this sport's about. And you know, the majority of us listening are amateur athletes, so let's just keep in mind our priorities, which is, you know, going home happy and safe. And if it means that you lost 45 seconds on your bike split, you know you lost that because of something out of your control. That's okay. Turn up to the next race and have another go. And
you'll probably make it up later on in the bike course anyway. It's one of those things, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, very true. So be safe out there, everybody. Okay, so what happens, Chris, if it's really windy on race day? It's never windy when I train. I want to go out and have a nice average speed, but I'm into a massive 20-mile headwind section. What can I do to control that?
For me, I'd urge athletes to not focus on average speed, whether it's the massive tailwind or the massive headwind. The figure that you're going to look down is not what you want to see or what you're going to expect, whether you're going much faster or much slower. It's kind of going to throw your overall plan out the window. So if you've got an average speed in mind, at this point, forget it. And I'd kind of say forget it for the majority of athletes out there. What you want to be focusing on is perceived effort and power. If you have a power meter, if you've been training with a power meter, stick to your zones, and heart rate. And heart rate's a pretty good one for headwind or tailwind as well. So in a headwind, it kind of depends what you're looking to get out of the event, whether you're looking to be right at the front of the race or trying to get round in one piece, which is a very different experience. A lot of racers might be looking to increase their power when there's a headwind. And the reason for that is that they know that they're going to hemorrhage power on the tailwind section. So therefore, they're trying to bring their average power up. And a headwind is a great and kind of easier way to do that. The risk there is that the perceived effort goes up a lot and the heart rate will go up a lot. So you have to be really careful. So the majority of kind of mid-pack races, I'd suggest stick to your plan and actually stick to your power zones that you've been training on, and don't be looking to kind of increase it too much. Look to stay aero, look to stay well fueled and really calm and get blown around, and kind of don't change too much is kind of what I'm saying. But then on the tailwind section, again, you're going to get a lot more kind of free speed. And if you've looked after yourself in that headwind section, then you're going to be able to push on and get some real good average speed in that tailwind section. So yeah, it's a tricky one, and it kind of comes down to what you're looking to get out of your bike split. And
it messes with people's heads, doesn't it? A 20-mile-an-hour headwind messes with your head because your average speed, or the speed that you perceive you should be going for the effort that you perceive you're putting in, is totally out of whack. It's almost like you're going uphill. And people think, well, you know, I need to be averaging 20 miles an hour. It's dead common. Someone will pick an arbitrary 30 kilometers an hour. They'll pick an arbitrary round number and end up putting out far too much power for that section. You're dead right. All you can control is how calm you stay and how aero you can stay. And you've just got to think that effectively there's a 20-mile-an-hour headwind. It's a really good opportunity to stay as aerodynamic as you possibly can be and reduce the amount of drag that's being produced. You'll make up some of the time later on, but we have to accept a really, really windy day is often not going to produce the fastest bike splits for everybody except our very top age groupers who understand how to use headwinds, tailwinds, and sidewinds to produce more speed. If that's not you yet, that's okay. That'll come in time. Just stay calm and collected into the big headwind sections. What do we do then if things go wrong with the technology of our bikes? If the Garmin fails, if the heart rate fails, if the power meter readings or heart rate readings are wildly higher or lower than it feels like they should be. This is a really common one as well, isn't it?
I've had it. I've had it myself in my first Ironman, which it totally threw me because I'd done all my training around using my cycling computer and power and heart rate. And on the day, my first hour was fine, and then the power meter just cuts out, and then the heart rate just cuts out. And I was just sitting up on the bike. I was like, what do I do now? And yeah, I kind of came to the conclusion after, a bit of time of, oh, no one around me cares whether I've got power or heart rate, and I know how to ride a bike, and I know what my perceived effort is, and therefore all I had was total time. So I was just using that every 15 minutes as a reminder to eat and drink. And apart from that, I just had to go on perceived effort. And it felt great once I'd got my mind around oh my God, I've got no idea what my power is, and I've got no idea what my heart rate is. But actually, by the time you get on an Ironman or middle distance start line, the likelihood is you've done so many hours in the saddle that you do know what zone 2, let's say, aerobic effort feels like. And it shouldn't change on race day. It's not as if we're training zone 2 all year to suddenly be racing in zone 4 in a middle distance or long distance. Zone 2 is zone 2, and that's what you need to be doing in an endurance event. Yeah. So at times it will feel like you're going too easy, but that's okay. It's a long day, and don't freak out. If power goes, then stick to heart rate. If heart rate goes, then stick to power. If both go on perceived effort and back yourself, and don't suddenly be following the person in front of you or the pack that suddenly flies past you. You were doing that for a good reason, because that was your perceived effort, and that is the zone that you should be in. So yeah, it's a really tricky one though.
It is. It's hard if that fails, and it always seems to for somebody. The number of times people say the power meter just didn't connect today, and it's always on race day. It's almost like it's an additional challenge that gets thrown to people sometimes. So I think the takeaway is, 1, stay calm, and 2, if you're going to do anything, ride a little bit easier than you planned to, rather than a little bit harder, because you can always make that time up on the run if you've gone a bit easier. If you've gone a bit harder than you've meant to, the chances are you're making nothing up on the run, and you're having a long and painful walk home.
And it goes again to what we said with the swim of backing yourself with a bold decision, and not necessarily just following what everyone else is doing, because they might be pacing themselves off you. So if you increase, they increase. If they increase, you increase. And that's not what you want for a successful run later on. You just need to control your own little bubble, your own little sphere. And it's a lot easier to do that with data. But as soon as the data goes, you have to stick to how it feels for you, not what it feels for the other people.
100%. So mechanicals then: punctures, split tires, broken chains, brakes going. I think there's 2 ways we can deal with this. Number 1, get the bike serviced a couple of weeks before the event, so you can be sure that as many of the things have been taken care of. There's a great example here. One of my athletes did Fred Whitten at the weekend and had the bike serviced a week before, and the mechanic said to her, yeah, your wheels are on the way out. They'll be all right for the Fred, but they're on the way out. You need to think about getting a new set. And sure enough, the free hub shattered into a million pieces halfway around the Fred Whitten. So she was left kicking herself that she hadn't just ponied up for the new wheels at the time, but also then had to phone for a rescue from the other side of the Lake District. And it was this massive drama. So again, take care of the taking care of the servicing part of it. Some of the stuff you can fix on the road, and some you can't. And I'd advise everyone in a long distance race to carry, the few 100 grams worth of saddlebag that's got spare tube, little tool, Allen keys with enough to fix anything that might come loose on your own bike. Be really self-sufficient. We all know the stories of the people who ride with nothing, with no, it feels great to strip your bike right down and it looks really racy, but it's a lot of training to have put in to not be able to fix a puncture, or to not be able to tighten your aero bars because they've started to get loose. And again, it's amazing how many people that happens to on race day. So have the equipment to be able to fix that stuff.
Here's a good little racers tip, and this is for the people that are either really struggling with storage space, or they're weight weenies and really want to strip their bike down to the absolute minimum. And it's not very cost effective, but it's a great way to save some space. They're not a sponsor, but they're called Tubolito, and they're essentially a inner tube company, and they've managed to get inner tubes that are absolutely tiny, but just as robust as the butyl inner tubes. And so if you're struggling for space, they're, you know, I think they're less than half the size and weight of your regular inner tube, and absolutely, you know, minuscule.
Really tiny.
They cost a lot, but
Yeah.
if you're only using them as emergencies, you know, I think I bought 2 in my kind of 10 years, because it's very rare that you have a puncture on race day. So it could be a good investment. Take a look. They're called Tubolito. Yeah, look at the price before you buy, but it could be a great weight saving thing. And I race off road now, and it's, to me, it's revolutionary, because the inner tubes are massive for off road, and these are tiny. So yeah, it could be a good little winner.
And again, things people can do, if you've bought a secondhand bike and the bike's got old tubular tires on, the chances are if a tubular tire goes in a race, it spoiled your day. Let's say that it spoiled your day. Tubs are enormously heavy to carry around with you. You've got to have basically a whole tire with you. I would advise people trying to change to a modern tubeless setup of wheels. Even if you bought a secondhand bike, look at spending the money, if you can possibly afford it, to go tubeless, because that's going to protect you from a lot of the minor punctures that you might pick up for sure. You can run lower pressure, so you've got hopefully a little bit less chance of getting a puncture anyway. But this again comes down to preparation for things you can do 3 months before the race, rather than worrying about, you know, I've raced tubs in the past and punctured at Ironman UK on tubs and sat at the roadside just absolutely despairing with three spectators trying to help me pull the old tub off the tire, having done everything right, having left a gap for there to be no glue on. It's just 20 minutes of utter despair after a whole year's worth of great training. So taking the time to get that stuff sorted equipment wise, it would have cost me a little bit more to set up the right wheels, but cost me a whole lot more in the great scheme of things. And you just don't end up doing that many Ironmans in your life.
Yeah. And there are enough options out there. I think back in the day, where tubs were definitely the fastest and the race option, we've got so many options now. Like the clincher wheels can be really fast now, really easy to sort. Same with
there's no difference between them these days.
Exactly.
All the top pros are racing clincher tubeless, so there's no reason not to.
Yeah.
Okay, things that can go wrong on the run. Then we'll move on to that. This is really where people's races are made or fall apart, isn't it? There's an awful lot of things go wrong on the run that are a direct result of how an athlete has paced their day or fueled their day up till this point. So that's the first thing I'm going to say. Again, we're back to controlling the things you can control. If you've taken care of getting all of the right number of calories in, the right amount of electrolytes, the right amount of fluid, you've controlled an awful lot of the things that can go wrong. Because if you're feeling really sick on the run, if you're struggling with cramps on the run, or you blow up horribly on the run, that's either down to incorrect fueling or incorrect pacing in almost all cases. So that can be taken care of. And honestly, that's the answer to, well, why am I cramping on the run? It's not what can you do right now in the moment, no magic tablet, or as much as people try to convince you that what's meant to take cramps away, gargling with pickle juice is meant to be a thing that works, right? Back yourself to take care of those problems before they become a problem.
I think another 2 fairly easy prevention techniques would be making sure you have full mobility and range of motion through your ankles, feet, calves pre-race. And that doesn't mean literally on the morning, that is great, but also the morning before that, and go as far back as you can. And just making sure that you have that full range of motion before you go in the water. Even though you may not be a cramp sufferer, it may hit you 6 hours down the line on the run. So just making sure that you have that range of motion really helps. Another one is making sure, and this is a fine balance, but making sure that you do cover some mileage in the race shoes that you're going to be using. And, you know, this is even more prevalent with the whole carbon shoe, super shoe. A lot of athletes are literally just saving them for race day. I understand that. That's great. And I'm not saying you should be running in carbon in all your endurance runs. That's absolutely not right. But you do need to prepare your body, because even though it may feel like it's a very easy transition from your endurance shoe to your race shoe, there are nuances, and how the arc of your foot and your toes and the splay, all those things are going to have a massive impact on the lower limbs. So that could be a cause of cramp if your body is not used to that, especially on these long runs. We're talking about 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, even longer. So you do need to kind of factor that into your training schedule of some runs will need to be in the shoe that you're planning on running in.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's move on to talking about weather then. This is often something that comes up 1 day or 2 days before the race when people suddenly get into a panic and say, but it's going to be 38 degrees on race day in Roth or Germany or Austria or Mallorca. What do I do? How do I prepare? Again, I think a large part of this comes down to being as prepared as you can be, choosing the races that you're going to be able to prepare for the likely conditions. That can go a long way to it. If you live in Bradford and you're choosing to race, I don't know, Ironman Arizona, and it's going to be 30 degrees on race day there, you've set yourself an uphill battle there preparing. There are things you can do. We've talked a lot about the heat training protocol that people can do, but be aware that it's very unpleasant. It's a very large extra stressor on your time and on your dedication to the racing that, let's be honest, most people are not going to be prepared to spend the time and the discomfort doing, apart from our very front of pack races. So to a certain extent, all you can do is control things like making sure you don't get sunburnt in the lead up to the race and on the race itself. Make sure you've got tons and tons of sun cream on. The flip side of that is races where it's going to be really, really cold. It's going to rain. I'm looking here at you, Ironman UK and Ironman Wales. Getting athletes to accept that you're probably not going to be able to race just in that skin suit that you had planned to, but what will you do instead? It's having those extra, occasionally I get a little uncomfortable now that Zwift is around and makes the indoor riding so easy and pleasant. Yeah, it's great to grind out 3 hours indoors and you get a pat on the back for doing the training. But if you've never been outside and trained in the rain, and then it's 5 hours in the rain on race day, is it reasonable to expect you're going to have known how to prepare for it or not? I do think it's worth athletes deliberately choosing the difficult path at least some of the time and going, right, okay, this is what a rainy ride, let's say you're doing Ironman Wales and it rains and is windy all day and you're going to be out of the water at 7 a.m. and it's 8 degrees centigrade and there's no sun. Have you been out for a ride at that time of day in that kind of weather? Do you know what to expect and what to be wearing so you don't get hypothermic after 2 hours?
And I think that's where the race simulation weekends come really handy, not just for the training effect, but also through going through a process. And if you have that in your calendar of this is my simulation weekend and I am pretending that this is my A race day. So therefore, whatever the weather is, as long as it's safe and the event would be going ahead, you kind of need to get out there and find your solution, whether it's wearing a rain jacket and all these things that are going to massively affect your average speed. It doesn't matter. It's kind of your practice day for race day. And if you go through that process once or twice pre-race day, you're not going to care. You can hardly look at the weather on race day knowing that you've got all the kit in the bag that you need and you know that you're going to cope with it.
Yeah.
One thing that I will, one thing that I was keen to mention was around those really hot days. And I've raced in a lot of heat before. And I remember reading a scientific study that had the comparison of racing in really hot weather is very similar to an athlete trying to race at altitude without being altitude prepared. And that was a real kind of turning moment for me because I've been racing in the UK the whole time and training in the UK. And so I had my fixed goals and power numbers. And then I'd try and translate that into Hawaii, Nice, wherever it was. And the reality is heart rate's totally different, perceived effort's totally different, nutritional demands are totally different, and power numbers are totally different. So suddenly it's as if I'm training with all this data and all this knowledge, and I'm in a totally different environment. And all I want to kind of get across in this is please don't stick to your UK power numbers or heart rate. You have to flex them, and the majority of the time you're going to have to bring them down by a good 10%. And it feels frustrating because you feel like you can put X amount of watts out for that duration, but that's in your home environment, which is totally different to 35 degrees and wind. And so, we've seen it all before. And that's, we've seen the famous images of Kona, everyone, the top athletes in the world walking around with their hands on their head. And that's because they're putting out similar numbers that they do in their regular training environment at home. So be very cautious with the heat, be respectful of it.
And I think a large part of it comes down to athletes having to be flexible enough to accept it can't be goal driven. It can't be a time driven event. If you have to accept if it's going to be 38, 39 degrees on race day, you are not going to race as fast as if it was 18 degrees on race day. That's just a fact. That there's no way that if you are one of these people who is aiming to just crack the 11-hour barrier or just crack the 10-hour barrier and everything has to go right for you to be able to do that. Well, guess what? If there's an extra 20 degrees of heat stress on the day, you have to accept ahead of time. Well, it's not going to happen this time. It's not going to happen. We've got a little dog come to say hello to the show.
Hello, doggy.
Hello. Hi. You're going to come and say hi to everybody on screen? This is Ruby, the triathlon dog.
Hello, Ruby.
She's in charge of barking at postmen. Go on, off you go. Oh, for all the people listening on the podcast, you're going to have to see the video version of this now to meet Ruby, the triathlon dog.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to get a lock on the door. Right, let's talk about nutrition on race day. Things that can go wrong and challenges people face. Often it comes down to, it's often associated with heat, this, isn't it? Things change when it's hot. But what happens if it turns out you can't stomach the nutrition that you'd planned? What happens if you lose your own nutrition supply? You go over a bump. And again, I'm looking at you here, Ironman UK, with your speed bumps on the way out of T1. What happens if that bottle ejects and it's got your 1,500 calories in? People need to have a plan for around what to do if they really need to go to the toilet, if they start to get sick, if it's too hot and they can't absorb the strength of the fluid that they've made up.
I had a conversation yesterday with one of the high performance athletes, and they have a super solid plan A. It's impeccable. I can't fault it, and I have tried to fault it, and I just can't. Everything makes total sense. And we were talking, and we were playing similar scenarios of this particular athlete. He's got 2 big bottles on a rear cage behind the saddle, and that is the majority of the nutrition that's highly concentrated. And the big question there is, that's brilliant until you hit the speed bump, and they've never lost it in training, but it could happen on race day. So what plan A was to make sure that they had a gorilla style cage, which are the kind of super grip ones, which is brilliant, but you just never know. And so we came up with the scenario of losing a bottle, and plan A would be, if it's in the first half of the bike, you're going back for that bottle as long as it's safe and no one's behind you and you're not going to cause an accident. So if it's in the first hour of a middle distance, you're going to go back, you're going to get that bottle, and you know that's going to save you for the run. If it's in the second hour of the bike, then you're going to have to make a call as an athlete. How much nutrition have you got through? How's your perceived effort feeling? What are the temperatures like? And how's your goal time looking compared to what you set out to do? And if you can have a quick kind of checklist of, actually, I'm feeling fine, I'm ahead of where I want to be, I'm feeling absolutely fine, I've even taken on more nutrition than I need, I know that I'm going to be in T2 in 45 minutes, I don't really need that bottle, that's okay. I'm very happy for that athlete to kind of wave goodbye to that bottle that's just been ejected, as long as they're making it on a rational basis. If it's, oh my God, I've lost a bottle, there's a group in front of me, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just going to keep going and see what happens. Don't see what happens. You know what's going to happen the majority of the time, which is you're going to be walking the run, even though you could be a very strong runner. But I'm happy for that decision making to be made if they've already thought it through. Hour 1, I'm going back for the bottle. Hour 2, I'm going to make a rational decision of, it's getting hot, my legs aren't feeling great, I'm going back for that bottle. Or actually, I'm happy to take that risk, in inverted commas, of, I think I can get to T2 in real good shape here because I've got other solutions of gels, bars, I've got another bottle, that's okay.
Yeah, I like that. And something that's great in terms of emergency energy supply, I can remember doing exactly this in a 70.3, being in great shape, losing the bottle, not going back for it, feeling like 10 men all the way through the bike leg. And then the lights just went out 5K into the run, and I staggered around until I managed to get to the next aid station. Sure enough, sugar goes in, and 10 minutes later, you're running well again. And it's hilarious when you look at the graph where it's like the heart rate's here, then it's there, and then you can see where the sugar comes back in, and off you go. It's really frustrating because you realize both the 70.3 and the Ironman, they're energy limited events. They're not fitness limited events. It's more important to keep the energy going in than it is to be fit, because without the energy, you can't access any kind of the fitness at all. So it is a really, really important thing that athletes have got access to that energy. And if you've got aid stations coming up, it's definitely worth spending the extra couple of minutes, if that's happened, to stock up on a couple of extras. What I was going to say, the great emergency supply you've got these days is the new precision fuel and hydration, the big gels that they do with
the 90,
with 90 grams of carbs. So what would that be in there? 350, 360 calories in one pouch.
Yeah, equivalent of 3 gels usually, roughly. Yeah.
I think it's a really smart idea to have one of those stashed about your bike somewhere, even if it's electrical taped under the saddle, in the saddle rail. So it's there as an emergency thing you can stop and access, because that represents an hour's worth of energy for you in the event of an emergency. Stick it under your aero bars or somewhere that's out of the wind. It's a total no-brainer to have that as your you're in the deep stuff kit.
Totally. I am going to slightly correct myself in my example of the high performance athlete that I was just talking about. That is someone that is chasing a really ambitious goal. They're looking to be really competitive. So having that plan A and plan B of first hour, second hour, go back for your bottle or not, is applicable to that athlete. If you're an athlete that's looking to get to the finish line with a smile on your face, and this is an experience that you want to cherish and you definitely want to get to the finish line, then always go back for that bottle.
Yeah.
That is going to make a vast difference. And if you're not counting every second, then going back for that bottle may save you an hour on that run. So I'd always go back for the bottle unless you're looking for absolutely every second.
And again, know where the aid stations are on the bike course and the run course. Know in advance, look at the map and memorize it, because I think in most middle distance and long distance races, you'll have an aid station every 30 kilometers or so minimum, right? Possibly even closer together than that these days. So you're never going to be probably more than about an hour away from the next opportunity to pick something up. And that brings us to making sure, like test whatever the race organizer is giving you. Test those products beforehand to make sure. In 90% of cases, you're going to be totally fine. But there's always going to be that one case where you get given some random energy bar or some random gel and it just doesn't sit with you, and you get churned up stomach after eating it or drinking it, that you then know that you can't do that and you've got to have bits of banana or whatever.
I think a good way for the athletes to think about it is you need to be self-sufficient at least for an hour. So at whatever point within that race, if you lose all your nutrition in a disaster, you've still got that little secret pouch or that little secret weapon under the saddle that will just get you to the next aid station. And then at the next aid station, you can take your time, gather everything that you need that you've already tested in training, and then you'll hardly see the difference in your race time for the majority of athletes. So it's well worth having the mindset of being self-sufficient at least for an hour.
100%. Right, Chris. That brings us to the end of our what can go wrong and what we can do about it episode, I think.
Giving me a bit of anxiety talking about all these things that could happen. The likelihood is none of it's going to happen and you're going to be okay, but you're going to be a better athlete just knowing that these are the scenarios that other athletes have been through. And if it happens to you, you can have a little smile to yourself and give us a little wink knowing that you've thought about it.
Fire off plan B. That's the best place to be, isn't it? If your plan A doesn't work, at least you know what plan B is.
Totally.
All right, guys, here's some discount codes and deals for you to end up today's show at precisionfuelandhydration.com. Remember, we've just mentioned those amazing 90-gram gel packets. You can get those over at precisionfuelandhydration.com, along with many other things. You can use the code OA23 for 15% off your first order of electrolytes, carbohydrate fuel, gels, drink mixes, the delicious carbohydrate chews. We love this company. We love the products. We were fighting over them at the end of our week in Mallorca, weren't we, Chris? Trying to rustle up enough bits and bobs to get you through the long ride in the end when we all ran out.
Shout out to one of our athletes, Dawn, who bailed me with some lovely precision hydration. So thank you, Dawn.
Great stuff. And over at teamoxygenaddict.com, I think we've got the most comprehensive endurance sports coaching program for busy age groupers. No matter what endurance event you're doing, swimming, biking, running, or any combination of the above, you can book a call with us to see if you'd be a good fit for joining the team and to see how we could best help you out achieve your endurance event goals in 2023. And please pop over if you're racing any of the Ironman UK events this year. See us around with our Team Oxygen Addict kit on and you're a listener, pop over and say hello. It's always great to meet the listeners. So remember, there's links in the show notes so you don't have to remember them. Until next week, have a great training and racing week. I'm Coach Rob Wilby and he's Coach Chris Belfreman. And you've been listening to the Oxygen Addict podcast.